November 19th. In many a country cottage over the land, a tall old clock in a quiet corner told time in a tick-tock deliberation, whether the orchard branches hung with pink spray blossoms or icicles of sleet, whether the outside news was seed time or harvest, rain or drought, birth or death. The swing of the pendulum was right and left and right and left in a tick-tock deliberation. The face and dial of the clock had known the eyes of a boy who listened to its tick-tock and learned to read its minute and hour hands, and the boy had seen years measured off by the swinging pendulum and grown to man-size and had gone away. And the people in the cottage knew that the clock would stand there, and the boy never again would come into the room and look at the clock and ask, "What is the time?" In a row of graves of the unidentified, the boy would sleep long in the dedicated final resting place at Gettysburg. Why he had gone away and why he would never come back had roots in some mystery of flags and drums, of national fate in which individuals sink as in a deep sea of men swallowed and vanished in a man-made storm of smoke and steel. The mystery deepened and moved with ancient music and inviolable consolation because a solemn man of authority had stood at the graves of the unidentified and spoken words. We cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. From these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. And to the backward and forward pendulum swing of a tall old clock in a quiet corner, they might read those cadenced words while outside the windows the first flurry of snow blew across the orchard and down over the meadow, the beginnings of winter in a gunmetal gloaming to be later arched with a star-flung sky. Carl Sandburg. Sandburg went on to describe Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, November 19, 1863. He stood that day and stated that democracy was yet worth fighting for. The taller riddles of democracy stood up and out of that address. His cadences sang the ancient songs that where there is freedom, men have fought and sacrificed for it, and freedom was worth dying for. His outwardly smooth sentences were inside of them gnarled and tough with the enigmas of the American experiment. At Gettysburg, Lincoln proposed that the nation have a new birth of freedom, and the only way to honor these dead were to complete the great task remaining before them, before us. There was only one hope to dignify the horrible loss the country had endured, and that was to finish the work of expanding liberty and equality and narrowing the gap between the real and the ideal. I'm thinking that the proposition still stands. Lincoln's message goes far beyond that dedication of a cemetery in Pennsylvania. It resonates through the years as our purpose, our creed. The great task remains. It is for us, the living, to be dedicated to the unfinished work. And as my dad said, if you work for something, at something, towards something, hard enough and long enough, the work becomes the something. So, here it is. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation, so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. We've come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It's altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. This is Jim McGinnis. Fair winds.